Well, I'm afraid it's another little workshop roundup rather than a serious progress episode on the Esprit. As you can see, I've got the engine on an engine stand, which I did with the aid of the electric winch, which allows me to get stuff in and out of the loft. And with the engine coming in at about 165 without the flywheel, it is a very similar weight to the Lotus Inline 4, and probably very close to the turbo version, which is a little heavier. But we got it there, got it on the stand, and I have taken the sump off because I never liked the look of the amount of silicon that was around the edge, and there was also a broken sump bolt which took quite a bit of removing. It wasn't leaking from that area, but that was well seized in there, and in the end I had to make a guide block up and drill it out and then helicoil it. Again, M7 threads. The Italians, and indeed Ford these days, use M7 quite a reasonable amount. Now, the sump was contained quite a lot of oil because of the position of the drain plug. You know, it hasn't got a recess, and the oil in there was very black. The car had not been equipped with a thermostat in its thermostat housing, so that obviously meant it took a long time to get up to temperature, and the warm-up map was quite rich. It would blow black smoke. So I would say that's probably the reason for the oil being so black, given how few miles it had got. There was a lot of silicon, Doctor Who monster levels of silicon. I might have a still shot I can put in there. The real surprise, though, was the lack of a baffle. The online build pictures for this car show a baffle having been made, and you can see, you've got the mountings for it, but there wasn't one in place, which, given that this car is capable of generating pretty decent cornering forces, is not ideal. And I've taken the decision to buy a stock cast alloy alpha sump and modify it, which is something the original builder originally did, but apparently the sump distorted or something like that, and they ended up with this fabricated sump, which is somewhat oversized. I think I drained 9 litres of oil out of it, and there was still some remaining. It might have only been 8, but yeah, a lot of oil compared to the standard setup. It doesn't need to be that deep, and I didn't like the finish on the flange. The gasket was incredibly fragile, and I'm almost convinced it was a reused sump gasket, but in any case I'll get a new one on order. We'll get the new sump in. It needs shortening at the front here to clear the cross member in the car, and the drain plug's normally on the front and needs converting onto the side, but that looks all reasonably easy, and it's got some more effective baffling for the oil pickup. There was quite a lot of silicon dangling off the bottom of the pickup strainer, and in fact I carefully unfolded the tabs, gave that a proper clean up, and put it back on. There was no signs of anything inside the pump, and it wasn't as if the it was significantly blocked. Fortunately, the oversized nature of the sump meant that all the big blobs of silicon seemed to have collected in the corners. So yeah, waiting on the sump at the moment. They seem to be a little bit slow in dispatching that, but we'll see what happens. The other job I did actually manage to do, which was kind of a displacement activity, is the door check straps. Now at the top here is what was on the car, and that's all that was on the car. The rest of the check strap mechanism was entirely missing on the driver's door, and I believe these are a Rover P6 check strap assembly. You can get them, they're quite expensive. One side or the other I think is really hard to find, but you can convert them. They were mostly identical for both sides and then kind of assembled differently. But Lotus changed the design. You can see that they very much copied this front piece, but they came up with their own arrangement of a slot and a spring. And a couple of years after my Esprit, they started using these. They used them on the Excel, and I got a couple of used ones from Lotus Bits when I was up there one time, and new spring wires are available. I made up this little radiused bush that the radius matches the wire, and that's obviously what will eventually, with a little more force, slide down into the latch position to hold the door open. These are one of those parts where I think they're about £10 each if you buy them, and they're just mild steel. So these are in a 316L stainless. They'll be a little bit harder wearing. I may even just give that a little bit of hardening. And the front end, the holes were a little bit worn, and the originals have a little hidden feature. There's a little nylon washer recessed in the top with a wave washer underneath, which is, I think, intended as an anti-rattle feature, but you usually find it's all sort of glued together and doesn't really do that. Because I'm converting from one style to the other, I needed to pack this out slightly, so this has been drilled and reamed out, and some a Delrin bush and a thrust washer made up. So when these have been either painted or I might plate them, they can go back on, and I will finally have a door that won't swing open and slam into things unless I very carefully open it and prop it. Still haven't made a decision about the bulkhead repairs, how deep I go on getting them fixed, but you know, this is very definitely has to be done. But it's a question of, do I do everything all in one go whilst it's all apart? Because the previous repairs are not the best. And I think that's about it at the moment. I have been looking at the oil filter arrangement again. This was the takeoff plate that ran to a remote filter head and the original oil cooler, and I'd like to convert that to an oil to water exchanger. And now that the alternator is no longer taking all this space here, I think I can run the filter there as well, which should be reasonably accessible. So hopefully we'll be making a bit more progress soon.